I guess I'm pulling you back up a little bit to talk a little bit about the Connecticut program. But so I stopped my gig, the best one I've ever had actually in my life, as Commissioner of Consumer Protection about 6 weeks ago. I was there for close to 2.5 years. And the medical marijuana program was really one of the highlights of my stint there. And I want to thank Dr. Pesher for having me again and for this group, and saw my former colleague Andy Maynard. Oh, there he is, he's moved. And one of the interesting things is the program, although much different, as Don indicated, than Rhode Island and some other states, there's a holistic nature to it, which is, I think, part of the description. A lot of the stuff that Don does is done for you as a patient. That's part of the difference. But this group also, signifies kind of the holistic nature of this plant, the medicine, another good healthcare alternative for people, and whether there's experimentation being done on the ground by individual patients or by entities producing medicine, research being done, and we can get into the kind of the landscape in Connecticut. It's a really important thing. This, and as I'll show you, I think, in talking about the Connecticut program, medical marijuana it has a mix of Eastern and Western medicine involved in it. And it has a mix of, a medicine, but also combined with diet, with exercise. There really is a holistic nature to what's trying to be done in Connecticut, what is being done in Connecticut, and Rhode Island and elsewhere. So I think I wanted to give a little context, because people ask, well, why did Connecticut move towards this model? Why can't I grow plants? Why is it so restrictive? And we got to flash back to when Andy and I served in the Senate. It was 2008 or 2009, and I believe we both voted for a bill that would allow, I think it was 3 or 4 plants to be grown. Governor Rell vetoed the bill, and we didn't have the votes to override the veto. So nothing happened. Flash forward to 2012, I had retired, Senator Maynard was still serving, and under Governor Malloy, there was an attempt with my predecessor, Bill Rubenstein, to take another stab at this, if you will. And in judging kind of the politics, which is important to get something done, Connecticut, while oftentimes viewed as a liberal state, well, that's true in some ways, but it's amazing how conservative it actually is in many ways. The land of steady habits is not just a slogan, it's actually real. So the notion was, let's figure out a way to start something, literally plant the seeds, and to, in a very thoughtful and deliberate way, grow the program, literally and figuratively, and to build acceptance, tear down stigma, both of patients, of citizens, of physicians, of pharmacists, of you name it. And so in 2012, a bill was passed that set up the framework for the medical marijuana program. The big thing it did, the big step, was to say, okay, federal government, you can consider this plant a Schedule I drug, meaning 0 medicinal value. In Connecticut, we believe it's Schedule II. Still will be highly regulated, but there is medicinal value to the plant and the medicine that's produced from the plant. So that was the first step. And then, because of the Fed's, I will call it, Neanderthal attitude towards the plant, which has a benefit, by the way, which we can talk about later on the big pharma side, in the short run, at least. We knew that physicians, APRNs, those with prescribing authority under federal and state law, couldn't prescribe because their federal license was at stake. And so came up with a system to identify first 11 debilitating conditions. It's been expanded to 22. Within the next year, it will be expanded to 26 for adults. There are 6 conditions now for minors. There will be an additional condition over the next year added for minors. So to have specific debilitating conditions and to have physicians, and as of January 1 of this year, APRNs, be able to certify that a patient has the debilitating condition. The way the law is supposed to work, and in general it does, although there are abuses like any other law, is that the physician has to do a medically reasonable assessment of the patient, determine that they have the condition, that the benefits of the medicine would outweigh the detriments, and that they either have prescribed or don't think it'd be efficacious to prescribe another drug. That's the basic way it goes. Once the patient has that certification, they go to the department and they register, and then for a year, at a fee of $100, for a year, they have that registration. They have to designate a dispensary and then are able to go to one of 9 dispensaries. Even though you designate one, you can switch to get the product, which is grown by, as Don said, 4 producers, which are very interesting combinations of an agricultural business and kind of a pharmaceutical manufacturing business. Actually, in Connecticut, there's some issues in towns about how they're taxed, because there's different property tax levies based upon that activity. There originally were only 6 dispensaries. We did a request for application and expanded them to 9. I would imagine in the next, couple years, there will be a further expansion of that. Producers right now, the ability of the 4 producers to produce enough medicine has been deemed to be sufficient to do this. Now, when I said $100 a year, I just want to say that originally that $100 went into a medical marijuana fund. Unfortunately, it was ripped away from us because of the budget deficit, which not only made it what I say is an immoral tax on sick people, because at least if the money was going towards the program, there could be some kind of a self-sustaining justification for $100. But now it's going to pay for whatever else in the general fund. So that's where I kind of flipped the switch on it. And so that, besides that, issue, what it also did is it took away a growing fund for the department to be able to expand resources, human resources in particular, to produce registrations, to inspect, to do all the things that we do. Because in Connecticut, when they decided to grow the program, start it and grow it, it was decided that a pharmaceutical model was the best way to go, so that the producers would be regulated like pharmaceutical companies, and the dispensaries, which would be run by licensed pharmacists, would be regulated like pharmacies. Now, that being said, it is a different animal, so it is not the same as regulating Pfizer, per se, or CVS on the other side. And that's been one of the interesting things as commissioner, when you have the drug control division that are the regulators, and kind of where you kind of get them to ease up off the gas and put on the brake and have an appropriate balance of how you regulate the system to provide as much product, as much diversity as product, the best access to as many patients that need the medicine. So that was just kind of an interesting aside of what the Deputy Commissioner, Michelle Siegel, who's now the Commissioner, and I had to do vis-a-vis our drug control people, who are used to regulating pharmaceuticals and pharmacies in a certain way. So the model was the first pharmaceutical model in the country, and what was really the goal was to keep the relationship between the physician, the healthcare professional, the patient, and the pharmacist, what we call the 3 Ps. You wanted to keep that relationship together and build better healthcare based on that relationship. The reality is that 2 of the Ps are more active, except for in certain cases where you have an enlightened physician like Dr. Pesher, who is much more involved, and as this group shows, and not that the other physicians are not enlightened, but they're just used to their practices in a certain way. So a lot of the consultation, a lot of the adjustment of the various types of medicine, the consultation about diet, about exercise, a lot of the dispensaries offer yoga, Reiki, massage, either on premises or next door or affiliated organizations. A lot of that day-to-day type of adjustment and balance is done between the pharmacist and the patient. So, and the doctors are, involved at varying degrees of what they do. I will also tell you, though, by the way, of regulation, it's much more heavily regulated, and this is sort of the myth that some of the, well, we'll put it, less thoughtful people in Connecticut, where you'd be like, we don't want a dispensary, you're going to have little kids carrying around marijuana ice cream cones. They get closer to opioids, to benzos, to other dangerous products in a CVS, in a Rite Aid, in a local pharmacy. They can't even get into the dispensaries. You got to show your ID. You don't even get into the back to get your, what bothers me about this country a lot now, and this is not to be political, but just to get it off my freaking chest, is that people don't want to talk about facts anymore. I can spread out a plate of facts here, and Steph, you and I could have a disagreement, a reasonable disagreement about the plate of facts, but let's talk about facts, okay? Let's not make up myths and horror stories about things and just use fear or misunderstanding, disinformation, misinformation to prevent people from trying to get better health care and do the right thing. So the other thing about this model, really important, the producers, it's all pharmaceutical grade, so no pesticides allowed. As a matter of fact, and it has to be clean grown, they're inspected. They use really cool little microbes and bugs and stuff to deal with.
Pesticides at all?
Zero.
No.
Now, zero. Now, we have had come to our attention twice that I remember where there was a real serious problem with plant dying, and we went to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, who know about pesticides and how to do that, and we talked to them and got advice and guidance and allowed a certain, strike to save a crop, essentially. But the general rule, no exigent circumstances, nothing like that, zero pesticides allowed, completely natural, pharmaceutical grade, inspected, and each of these producers, it's mind-blowing when you go in. They each have their own way of producing the plants, the mother room and all the different grow rooms. Some have little kind of look like little embryos and gels, and there's a botanist that's figured that out. They each have different methods of doing that. And then when it comes to, harvesting and manufacturing, they each have different methods. You go in, and most of them you have to wear sort of almost hazmat suits, no pockets, fully secure. Some have scrubs, and they have all these different machines to do the extraction and to, extract the terpenes, to extract the different oils, the different chemicals, make hash. You see it coming out. There's these, so you're walking around these white suits, and there's a machine. It's like, it was like steam or something. At least I pictured the steam. I heard it did sound that way, and you feel like you're like in Oompa Loompa land with these. But the innovation of from grow to manufacture, three of the four producers are also regulated by DCP because we do food regulation, and they have kitchens. One doesn't have edibles, but three do have edibles. And so the proliferation of products from flower, which was when I left below 30% of kind of what was being sold, vaping also being popular, edibles, tinctures, topicals. There's oils that you can rub on yourself and you can cook with. All different things that Don was talking about that are being done on the ground. So it's not quite big pharma, but it is business without a doubt. And one of the benefits that for the federal government's backwards attitude towards this is it hasn't allowed the system to be crushed by big pharma or big tobacco. And hopefully these entities will grow strong enough that they will be able to keep some of their identity when the cork pops off And ultimately, maybe not in the next 4 years, we'll see, but ultimately the federal government wakes up and allows this to be treated as Schedule 2 or perhaps lower, a lower schedule. So it will happen. Now, the federal government, as you know, is taking a step backwards. Under President Obama, there was issued several memos. One, the big one called the Cole memo, through the Office of the Attorney General, that said, if you're functioning within the parameters of a legal state program, the feds are going to take a step back, and they're not going to bother. As a matter of fact, one of the areas that's been a challenge is banking. There was one overzealous FDIC person that I think wanted to make a name for themselves and kind of went after one of ours. We just called the FDIC, and because the Cole memo and allowing us to function within those parameters, was so important. I think the medical will probably survive. The retail that is becoming, more widespread, I'm not so certain. So pharmaceutical grade, all of the product is required to be lab tested. There are 2 to 4 labs that test controlled substances in Connecticut. They are required to test the product and everything, no matter whether it's an edible, a gel cap, a tablet, an oil, has to have all of the active and inactive ingredients right on the label, just like you would any other pharmaceutical. We don't use, to people, a lot of people's chagrin, we don't allow street names. You can find out what strains things are through conversation, but the idea was not to, have it be a street-like product, partly because of the politics to grow it, and also because there was a serious idea of having this be a pharmaceutical model. So, you don't have, although I will tell you, some of the great ads you see proliferating on television, the direct-to-consumer ads are outrageous at this point, and the amount that you have. There's half the time, there's a new name on it. It's like, a little cute cartoon, a nice life. I like that one. So in some ways, Big Pharma actually has a street name kind of marketing more than the medical marijuana program does in Connecticut. One of the good things also about the way it's produced is that there's a standardization of product. We even require, although not clipped down to nothing, homogenization amongst the flower to try to spread out and standardize the amount of the particular chemical, THC or other CBD, that you're getting in the particular batch. That was important for 2 reasons. One, dosing, and the physicians in particular were concerned about how to dose, especially when you're smoking in the flower, how to be able to dose that. And so we wanted to tear down that particular barrier. And I'll tell you, it has. We started out, when I got there, right after the legal product started coming online, there were 81 physicians certifying. As of this morning, I was told it was 692. So in less than 3 years, it's proliferated. APRNs also are in Connecticut. 692 docs. Now there are, of physicians, there's 26,000 physicians, but only really maybe 13,000 are active prescribers. So it's still a small percentage of prescribing physicians, but it's growing. It's expanding. There were, just so you know, order of magnitude, 1,400 patients. As of, I think, last Friday, there were 16,253 patients. So it's growing. It was growing by 100 plus a week. So much so that when we lost the money and we wanted to make sure people got their registration as quickly as possible, because it was taking 5 business days, 10 business days. At one point, it crept up to almost 15 business days. I would come in, we trained ourselves how to, because you couldn't get certain employees to come in on Saturdays because of work rules. I went in like I normally would go into work on Saturdays or Sundays, and I would spend 2 or 3 hours doing the registrations myself, and we had all the executive team do that, figuring that if we can knock off a few dozen more a week, it would help people get their medicine in a more timely fashion, kind of an all-hands-on-deck approach to it. So the standardization is also good because we have the nation's first research program in the country. Basically until now, again, because of the federal government's attitude, there was one place, I think in Mississippi, where they would grow grow the plant, and essentially most of the research was to show, like reefer madness, how bad it was. It wasn't actually to show the medicinal values and everything else. Well, maybe some. I don't want to get too overblown, but essentially that's what it was there to justify the flippant attitude, a century or so ago in the plant. And but because of the standardization, we're able to have research. We had research going on before, but we actually set up a program, and there were 2 projects when I left. I think there are some more in the pipeline now. First being St. Francis Hospital to use the medicine as an alternative for opioids and with pain for severe rib injuries. They have to have an institutional research board. We've structured it the way the FDA does, but it's in no way connected with the federal government. And this standardization allows this research to occur. The anecdotal research about kids not seizing as many times, like fewer times in a week than they would in a half a day, of people dealing with not only pain issues but disease condition and symptoms and having relief across the board on the debilitating conditions was there. There was research being done. One of the producers actually showed that real high doses of THC for cancer patients, in addition to, of course, dealing with pain and the effects of chemo, appetite enhancement, and getting rid of nausea. They saw actually a stoppage, and in some cases with breast cancer, a shrinking of the tumors with the high doses of THC. I mean, enough THC that you'll be on the couch. But if you're on chemo, you're on the couch pretty much anyway. So, the ability to we had anecdotal moving into more research. So the research has helped also, in addition to the dosing, tear down the barriers amongst the traditional medical community and more more growth and understanding of the program. I'll just kind of finish with that in addition to another really good healthcare choice to be made by patients suffering from some really serious conditions, diseases, it's created over 300 good jobs. And that's not counting the labs, it's not counting the multiplier effect, the supply stream to the producers or the dispensaries, but 300 good jobs and growing. And if we can become the focal point for research, so you don't have to go to Italy or to Israel or to Oregon, then and really have that science, it's another way to expand the biotech base that we do have here, particular in the Hartford area, up around UConn Health Center and other pockets around the state. So it's there's an economic benefit too that you can talk to people about why this program is important. First, obviously, healthcare, but it's nice to have another policy benefit when you're trying to do good things on the ground. So that's kind of the summary of where things are. I'll take questions. Yep.
So when you started, you said that way back in the day, you were supporting growing 3 or 4 of your own plants at home. But now, after hearing you speak, it seems more like you're into the big pharma, totally regulating and managing everything. It seems kind of like we're the complete opposite of Oregon, where they have thousands of independent people trying to come into a database system, and we're in a database system that isn't open to independent people trying to take care of themselves. Or if you do go into government, Connecticut, do you think that you're going to be on the big pharma side, or do you think you'll go back to supporting that 3 or 4 independently growing at home thing?
Well, it's not. I do want to clarify. It is not big pharma by any stretch of the means. I mean, they're not huge businesses. Their investments were pretty big, and they need to make money, but they pale in comparison to most pharmaceutical companies with both the way they do business, the way they produce their product. They're not isolating, a single kind of compound. There is this entourage effect of the 85 or so chemicals. I call it the stew. And there's a lot of experimentation with the different levels of CBDs and the terpenes. I mean, so it's not big pharma. So that is important to say up front. One of the benefits also of having it done through a medical system, we require physicians, APRNs, to look up the prescribing history of the patient. The use of medical cannabis is actually part of your medical record, just like any other pharmaceutical would be. When a pharmacist dispenses medical marijuana product at a dispensary, it's added to the prescription drug management program. So you have a health record. You can see everything that somebody's on, which is it's a good thing for people trying to treat, because they have a holistic picture. Whereas individuals doing it, you might not have that data captured. So there's a benefit there. Personally, I think at some point there's gonna be plants that are allowed. I would hope we would allow that to happen after the program reached a critical mass. It's in early adulthood. Estimate maybe, and this is kind of back of the envelope, but 35,000 patients. So,
That's what you think it'll take to get to the point where we would.
I think the program would be more likely to be self-sustaining and have its own identity and withstand, say, the crush of recreational retail, which will happen, but probably not for a couple of years.
You think it's a double, basically. We're at 16,000.
No, we're at 18, but it's growing. But it's growing. It would take a year or two to get there, probably 2 years, and then at that point you'll have the model that's has its own identity both in the medical community with patients, with pharmacists, and allowing people to do their own thing. People will realize what the advantages are, what they are. Not everyone's going to have the time, the knowledge, the patience that Don has to do what he's doing.
Just the right to be able to do so legally is all I'm really.
Right. Rights always have to be balanced against other things. And I think that what this is producing as far as good health care, what it's producing as far as homogenization and standardization and the research that is going to help everybody. I mean, the recreational debate in Connecticut would not be where it is today if this program had not started and grown deliberately and torn down the stigma. Automatically, you are already closer probably to legally having what you call that right, which I'm not disputing, than you would have been had this not been done this way.
I own property on the Rhode Island-Connecticut border. I'm a Connecticut resident, so it's just very, I have 4 acres in Rhode Island and 10 in Connecticut. So
Yeah.
It's a very interesting situation.
There will be within the next 2 years recreational. 2 to 5, but I think 2 years. Yeah. And
when are you running for governor? I'm sorry.
I'm 2018. I'm exploring a run for governor, a potential candidacy. I have no public declaration. I'm not allowed to. Just like you're not allowed to grow on the Connecticut side, I'm not allowed to publicly declare.
Very good. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator. So I don't have a problem. I would sign a recreational bill. I call it retail because I think it's just.
Is that what it's called, a recreational bill?
There are bills now that they're trying because they're claiming it'll help balance the budget. There is revenue there without a doubt, whether it's realistic revenue projections, but a lot of the stuff, and one of the problems is that a lot of public policy, a lot of corporate policy in this country is made with like limited horizons. Oh, we need to give shareholders value, or oh, we need to balance a budget. What this medical program is doing, as you can see from the good jobs, everything else, is it's creating a more solid long-term revenue base. Sometimes it's worth sacrificing even a little bump up in revenue on the front end because you're going to be first to the game and looking at the long-term play. And part of the problem with the state is we haven't in a long time looked towards that long-term play. To get ourselves out of the problem we're in, it's going to take 10 years of structural change and things to happen. Pain. Same thing here. You got to look at the long-term game. So it will happen. And at that point, I think the medical program will be able to withstand it. For the people that don't believe in retail, it's here. It's going to be in Rhode Island, Massachusetts. It's going to be all around. This notion of people sticking their head in the sand and saying, it's a gateway, we hate it, blah, 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 blah. Actually, I will tell you, not just from what we calculated, but a study done in 2015 of the states in 2013, and there were, I think, 17 only. There are now 30, including the District of Columbia, that have medical programs. The prescribing of opioids and painkillers in states with medical cannabis
We have a really
went down.
big problem with that in the state of Connecticut, I mean, massive, especially in this area.
We had it throughout the country. My brother-in-law being one who died of an overdose because he fell off a roof and started taking painkillers on Father's Day with a 5-year-old kid. So I come to this not only as a policy guy, but as someone who's been there. A cousin that's been addicted, and it's horrible. This medical marijuana is actually a solution to that, as I was just talking to somebody on the way down who is really against the retail sales. But it's going to be here. So see what they do in Massachusetts around there, regulated appropriately. I haven't been to Colorado. I was supposed to go, but I left my job. But I have been to Washington State, and I saw the way that they regulate in Washington State. So there are different models, but ultimately I think Connecticut will have, they're going to have dispensaries even for the retail, but I think there will be plants too. Ultimately there will be.
How many dispensaries are there in Connecticut?
9.
And they're like mostly on the other side of the state then? Or?
They are the real place where population-wise, where you have concentrations of patients, that there's a smaller number than is really needed is in Fairfield County. Because there's Bethel and then there's 2 in Milford.
Yeah, I've seen those numbers. I'm an analyst.
Yeah.
I've studied those. I'm just interested to know if there'll ever be another dispensary, you know.
Well, yeah, I have that question because, well, I talked to you last time about
Yep.
this. Montville is jammed all the time.
Yeah.
7 days a week, you can't always get what you want, you can't get high CBD products, the prices are constantly going up, and you gotta place a day, an order a week ahead of time to get what you need, and you cannot always get what you need. And you need another dispensary in this area.
The problem with that, I'm not disputing that, the problem with that is that the way the law and the regs in particular are,
But don't you go by the numbers of the people, the amount of
but there's,
people
but
that live
there's,
there?
but it's a structured program so that the way to get more dispensaries is through a request for application, which is a bear as far as,
100,000
Yeah, but didn't you just
an
put some on the
application.
other-
well, I'm not saying what the cost is, I'm saying the internal resources. You have to change the reg in the law to do it, because it took us, for the added 3 that we just added a year ago, it took, a 6-month period for the dispensaries to develop their plans, get their zoning authority, get their, their options for their leases, come up with their security plan, everything, the build out, whatever they needed. Then it took another 4 to 6 months. We had 19 applications. Pretty quickly, 2 were weeded out. Kind of a pun, I guess. 2 were weeded out, so we reviewed 17. It took 6 people, and I was only involved in the last piece, 4 to 6 months to go through. I mean, these applications are like this. We're trying to look at more vertical integration so that like a producer could actually, because they can't discriminate on who they sell to, maybe open up a dispensary. So it would be a shortcut because they already have some of the creds and changes. There's other ways that they're trying to shortcut that. But ultimately now the way the regs are fashioned, and it takes a while to change regs in this state because of the process, it's only through a request for application. And that takes a long time. And there's just not the people power to do it, as I said.
And is that because there's so many budget cuts?
The Department of Consumer Protection does all liquor control, all legal gaming. most of the licensing in the state, 230 different credentials, professional, occupational, about 282,000 credentials outstanding, not including drug control. All drug control, all foods, all weights and measures, the big scales, the little scales, all product safety, all the unfair trade practices for the state. With the scales, we calibrate the gas pumps, the home heating oil, the propane. We did it on 263 people. We're down 50 people. And we cut 13% last year. Now, we did 19 process improvement events last year and did put technology. So we're actually doing better at what we do. But the idea of being able to marshal the people right now to be able to go through that RFA is just, it's tough to do. Well, you can, and it will happen, but you got to wait for the demand to reach certain more critical points. So
35,000.
well, no, that's not that. There could be more dispensaries before 35,000. 35,000 is my kind of thumbnail idea about when the program reaches mature adulthood and then is not going to be knocked over by retail sales or just, allowing people to grow, because it's going to have its own identity. People are going to get used to it. It'll be more accepted amongst patient, medical, pharmacy community. And it might be a little less than that, but that was kind of what a lot of the businesses said, where when you had 35 patients, the producers, not only would they be able to, pay off their, have operating, but start paying off their investors, because they had a huge
So
investment.
17 people applied, 17 companies applied for these licenses dispense. You allowed 9 of them. Is there a number?
We allowed 3.
You allowed 3 new ones.
That's what the RFA was for.
So there's 9.
But it was that was limited, actually. We were trying at that one to target and fill the hole. But unfortunately, because a lot of communities either have moratoria, which really would, if legally challenged, would be knocked down, or just weren't hospitable. One town, Milford, actually was, they put out the welcome mat, much to the chagrin of a lot of people, and they had a thought-out zoning ordinance. So of the 17, 9 were for places in Milford. 3 or 4 were for the same place, where the landlord was brilliant and got a bunch of options and must have made a lot of money. So we actually, and you don't necessarily look just at the place. You got to score for all these things, and it was tough. We had, luckily, 2 of the ones that would have been top were at the same place. So the second one got knocked out, which allowed us to put one down in the Waterbury area. So, because we had Bristol kind of up, so Litchfield County, that's covered. It would be good to have one, although the patient numbers are,
Maybe they're just not on the books yet. I don't think.
well, they're on the books, but it doesn't take away some of the problems you described. So it's something that we've been thinking about before I left, and they'll have to think about within the next, reasonable period of time about how to deal with that, either going through the RFA process, figuring out a way around it legally, or changing it. But right now, the law is the law, so you're kind of, it's one of the detriments of the structure that was put in.
It could be worse. It could be in Rhode Island, where the state police are just trying to figure out what to do with all that crazy stuff that they opened the can, allowing everybody to grow.
But again, I think there's a balance here. Ultimately, I think it'll go the direction that you
It'd be
want.
interesting to,
Yeah.
it's interesting to grow up during this time and raise a family and watch all of this unfold and see habituals that have been habituals our whole life, people just starting out with the stigma of not wanting to be associated with it.
Right. I mean, people have to realize what we're talking about here is medicine.
The opiate assistance is massive.
We're talking about, that's what we're talking about, and it's about, and Milford, for example, one of the dispensaries, Arrow, that has the dispensary in Hartford, took an old building on the edge of a commercial area near a neighborhood, and the attitudes there were, same kind of thing, they're going to be smoking joints. Well, they're actually not allowed to openly it's all in secure cases, containers, just like any other pharmaceutical. They're not even allowed to open it till they get home to to a place of privacy. Anecdotally, we have evidence that when you have a dispensary in the area, it's safer in the neighborhood because of the amount of cameras. And what I try to tell people, this isn't Cheech and Chong. It's not Colorado. This is about, your grandparents, parents, friends that are suffering from really bad stuff getting medicine. And so this is not about, up in smoke and big gibber and stuff like that. Now, there's some people that might do that, but that's not what this is about. And most people don't. And the instances of diversion and problems at these facilities has been way less than at a traditional pharmacy with traditional pharmaceuticals.
If you support like this research methodology so much, do you think you'd also support the idea of printing all of the stuff that's found in these strands on the label? Like, if it has the ingredients versus it has the percentage, if we're gonna be the center.
It has percentages. I think it's
It
like
does.
it's like a 3% deviation on it.
So
It has just like you.
talking about testing your strand, what's the difference between that and, I'm sorry, I'm talking to.
Donnie,
Oh, yes.
So that test sheet that you handed out with all the percentages,
That's the same kind of test that
it's the
they're.
same test,
Yeah.
okay, I'm sorry, I've never bought from.
Yeah, no, we have that.
Like,
You'd say it right on the label.
Because few people ever get to see that test, because you gotta be growing it and you're willing to pay the money to get the test done.
But you're saying that it's on the box.
It has to be.
Okay, it's on everything.
Yeah, that's one thing that's really nice about the Connecticut program is that terpene data is available.
Okay.
You know what you're getting.
Yeah, you know what you get. And efficacy has always been my main concern anyhow. I'm in Rhode Island only because that was the first place I got. And that got me into growing, but I got to see what happened. And the model that Connecticut used avoids the whole organized crime,
That's wonderful, I didn't know that. That was.
because that's what's always run the marijuana industry in Rhode Island.
Right.
For centuries.
But I don't know if this is a appropriate analogy, but just like, you have restaurants and big restaurant chains and stuff, and now with local food and farm to table, there's like a change in the way the industry functions and the way people view where their food is produced and how it's cooked and things like that. There'll be similar changes with local. Well, yeah, there'll be similar changes on things like that. So
I saw something in Oregon that was just, you wouldn't have believed it possible 10 years ago. There was a meeting such as this, but 3 times as many people. There was nobody under the age of 50 in the room. It was in a firehouse, of all places, the town firehouse. And these people are talking as we are about the marijuana and how it's working on their particular condition. And then at the end of the meeting, everybody's swapping marijuana plants and products and edibles and this, that, and the other stuff. And I'm there. So this is how it's going to end up. Huh? This acceptance this way, and that, there's no stigma attached to using it, and people are sharing information and experiencing and trying to figure out how it all works together.
Yeah.
Which is really neat.
it is. It's very, very
But
interesting.
it all starts with that, like I said, the efficacy. You have to know what you have. And you have to be reliable. You can go out and buy it on the street if you know those connections, but you don't know what you get. It's got mold. You want mold? I don't want mold.
Yeah, we don't, when there's mold stuff, that's a big thing with
It's
business.
wonderful, the way you explained the farmer fuel. I
Yeah.
don't mean to label it as
No,
such, but
it's just a big, it's a hybrid because it's little mom and pop. These, especially the producers they have a lot of investment in machinery, they employ a lot of people, but it's not.
I think there's a
Yeah.
stigma tied to it though, in a sense, like I look at it like pharmaceutical and chemical and not regulated and also being like in a system. And I feel like a lot of people that do use marijuana do not want to be put in a system, and maybe that's why the numbers are only what they are. So maybe there is some kind of change with the stigma of being in the system, all of that.
Yeah. That's it. There's compassionate needs programs, and actually we started doing audits. We're putting a lot more energy into audits of the businesses to see actually what they're doing and
People can work
Right.
for their license or something
So-
in these places, I mean, I don't know, except like, you say you can't afford to spend $300 on, you know, paying.
Just the doctor's appointment each year.
Yep.
Maybe
Ult-
there's some kind of workforce development program you could do for people that want to partake.
well, the bill, the original law in 2012, again, to get it passed, specifically said that insurance companies are not required to cover. But when you start seeing both anecdotal, which is growing, and now the research, at some point, the insurance companies are going to start covering it because it's going to be cheaper. And they're looking at their bottom line. So I at some point, and can't predict when, but not tremendously far off, you're going to see insurance companies, I think, starting to.
There is no
Sure.
state that insurance companies recognize this as medicinal, right?
No, but not that I know of.
Connecticut
Half
has
only-
a good chance though, because the efficacy that they're
Yep.
putting in the whole product.
Only half of the states, fewer than half, I think 12 of the 30, I don't think that counts Guam, just the District of Columbia. Only, I think 12 allow plants to be grown. So most of the medical states don't allow individuals to grow yet. But, yeah.
I have two questions. One's probably you and the other would be for Don. You were mentioning that we use medical marijuana and it should be in our medical records with our physicians in the hospital. They have a thing now where when you're going for a visit, they print everything out and hand it to you, so it has everything on it. So I was looking at it, found a lot of things wrong, but because all it said was medical marijuana. Now, shouldn't they have put down what strains that you're using?
Or the types of medicine, because we don't,
What does that say?
in Connecticut, we don't really go by strains. We go by the medicine that's produced from various strains.
Yeah,
But-
but I mean, just medical marijuana. what
I've
does
seen
that
it that when they're entering it, where they do put the type that was dispensed, so,
L&M isn't, so.
yeah.
She means the hospital isn't
Yeah.
up to speed yet,
Yeah,
but the dispensaries definitely have it in your record.
and the other
They
one is,
don't prescribe the product, they prescribe the treatment. right?
Exactly.
They,
Right.
where they certify the condition,
yeah.
and then sometimes with the physicians, but usually more with the patient and the pharmacist, they deal with the types of products. Good to see you, Andy.
See,
See you there.
The pharmacists don't always know exactly what you need. It's just like you were saying, trial and error. Like one lady told me, like, oh, take this mid strip and you fall asleep, and it's like, I was
Yeah.
for like 5 hours. So like, you know, it all
And that's, I, as public health chair when I was in the Senate, I thought that there should be more what we call collaborative practice between doctors and pharmacists, because they have independent bases of knowledge overlapping, but there are pharmacists that know more about interactions of different pharmaceuticals than physicians do, because that's what they do. That's what they study that. So they're really important, all important pieces of the healthcare system. And that's why this program focused on keeping the 3 Ps together, the physician, the patient, and the pharmacist as a healthcare team as much as possible.
The second question was for Don, because I basically came tonight because I wanted to learn how to use it in foods. And I really, I really didn't get the gist of it. If I wanted to put whatever I'm going to use in, say, a cake or muffins, or can you use it like potatoes and vegetables also? Huh? Okay,
It's
how do you
oil.
know?
You
Huh?
put it in
The oil, yeah.
If you use it in oil form, you can put it on anything.
So how do you know how much, does the pharmacy sell just oil?
Yeah.
And how do you know how much to ask them for?
Well, depending how much is in the bottle, in terms of milligrams.
Uh-huh.
And the droppers, if they have a dropper, or you have to measure it out. So you know how many milligrams of THC are in
Some
a
instability in
particular
this program. So.
element of
Yeah, so
milliliters, whatever.
you know what the dose is, and you can.
So say I wanna make a pistachio cake in a 30 by 19.
Well, with the standardization in Connecticut, with what you get, say if it's an oil, you will know how much of the various chemicals you're putting.
You said instead of
You say you wanna
butter.
use, say you're gonna have 10 servings in there, and you got 200 ml, putting in there, because that's what it says on the bottle.
Right.
And you know, you're getting 20 milliliters per deal.
Some of the bottles, the syringes
I know.
actually say like base 20 brownies,
Yeah.
like on them, but you have to be careful, like for instance, like I went and asked them specifically, I said like I usually eat like a 10 milligram brownie, and so they calculated it for me in the dispensary, like,
Oh, okay.
so I mean, you could ask,
Right.
I don't know if everyone will, you know,
Let's shop.
Yeah, and the-
Well, yeah.
and the, so you can calculate that, and there was something else I was gonna say about the,
Did you see the website?
with the dosages. I'm spacing out on it now.
A little bit, yeah.
Was it like THC levels that you figure out which level you need and then you calculate it out?
Well, you could, yeah, I mean, you can tell by what's,
I've got his card.
what the label is, you know, how much
Oh, okay.
you need. Oh, in Connecticut also, you're allowed the equivalent of 2.5 ounces a
A
month.
month, yeah.
Now, we have raised that, we have the mechanism to raise that. There were certain cancer patients where that wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And there's a thought that, you know, people were creating a program that had never been done before. So the idea of 2.5 ounces, there was a rationale to it, but a lot of it was, you know, you're seeing in the dark. And so, right, and so now we're trying to figure out what's the right amount. Typically, 2.5 ounces is the right amount because some people don't use that. Most people don't complain that they need more, but there are been, you know, instances of particular cancer patients that they need 3 plus or minus, and we will allow them to go above.
That's for the Rick Simpson.
Sorry, that's okay.
Well, wonderful, Jonathan.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Thank you
much.
so
That's
much.
wonderful. And Donnie, both of you.
Thanks.
You guys did a great
Good to
job.
be here.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.